Welcome everybody to our webinar series on the Trauma, Gender, and Substance Use series. We're talking today about gender-informed approaches to substance use treatment. And this is a topic that has come up numerous times in some of our other webinars and certainly in some of our consultations across the country. So we're very excited today to have quite a group of people ready and willing to talk to you about their approaches. I'm going to just introduce them first. All three of our services today that we're discussing are based in Toronto. And I think it's going to be very interesting for all of you who are attending about which parts of the concerns raised by the Toronto services or which parts of the issues raised also concern you in your area of the country or in your kind of service. So basically, we're going to be talking about how services mandate to either provide women-specific or men-specific, or more recently, transgender-specific treatment approaches. So from the Jean Tweed Centre in Toronto, we have Lucy Hume and Julia Blumenfeld, and they'll be sharing their information with us about a woman-specific service. From Renaissance, we have Gail Power, Cynthia Langille, and a third person, Noah Zabas, whose name is not on this list, but who has joined us today. And they're going to be talking about Renaissance services, serve a variety of populations. And then we also have Dennis Long, who's the Executive Director of Breakaway Addiction Services, also based in Toronto. So we're going to do this webinar a little bit differently today. I'm going to interview these people who you see listed here about 2 or 3 main questions. We're going to be talking about their mandates. We're going to be talking about how they came to design women or men-specific treatment, and what makes women or men-specific treatment different from gender-neutral stuff. And then we're going to have a third question about more recent modifications or additions to programming for trans people. Before we get into it, though, just a few bits of review for those of you who have heard us before, or for those who might be new today. Our project is a 2-year project. We're midway through it. We've got many partners across the country, and what we're trying to do is talk about both trauma-informed and gender-informed responses in the substance use response system in Canada, and how we might collectively improve those responses. And one of the goals, therefore, is to guide the integration of trauma-informed, gender-informed, and gender-transformative practices into substance use prevention, promotion, treatment, harm reduction, and policy. It's a very wide mandate, but today, of course, we're just focusing on treatment. And this one, as I mentioned, will look specifically at treatment programs. All 3 examples are in Toronto, and we're going to be discussing successes and challenges in evolving these programs. This is just a screenshot of our website. You'll be able to go on this website at any time and see under featured projects all the materials related to this project, including recordings of previous webinars. This is a bit of a review. When we're talking about gender, we're talking about many, many different things. On the one top left quadrant, it's about gender identity and gender expression. It's about the feelings people have and whether or not they're congruent with their biological body at birth. On the right-hand top section, it's about our gender roles and all those things that are ascribed to us or determined by our environment, family, socialization. The bottom right, it's about the rules and regulations and laws that affect us based on our gender or sex. And on the bottom left, it's about all our gender relations, that is, the kind of power or lack of power we have in relating to other genders. And of course, all of this is complicated, as you can see on the right, by all kinds of other features that define us. So this slide is just to remind us that when we're talking about gender, we're talking about a lot of different things at once. And this slide, also a reminder for many of you who were with us on webinar number 2, that we can, in our services, and today let's just think about treatment services, choose to be gender blind, gender sensitive, gender specific, or we hope gender transformative. And what that actually means is that we can, on the left-hand side, just ignore gender and provide the same program for anyone who comes through the door. Or in the middle, we could say, okay, there are specific characteristics and needs for specific populations, and we're going to attend to that. And we'll certainly hear about that today. And of course, one of the goals of this project overall is to shift us into thinking about gender transformative work in substance use response, including treatment, so that we can say, okay, in our response, are we both improving the health of our clients as well as improving their equity? And that's a very different, sort of higher bar, but one that we'll keep in mind. So we're going to dig right in now without further ado. And I'm going to turn to Cynthia and Gail first, and Noah, certainly, if you want to jump in, to talk about the mandate of Renaissance. And just give us a little bit of a backgrounder, if you will, on what you do there and how it came to be. Thank you. Gail? Gail, you're on mute. Hi, Gail.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, Gail. Please go ahead.
You're there now.
Oh, am I here now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll begin again. My name is Gail Power. I'm the manager of the Gray Monroe Center, which is Renaissance Treatment Center for Women. And Renaissance mandate is to provide addiction recovery programs for those at the most serious end of the substance use continuum. So that means clients that have tried other options but now have an understanding that they need or are seeking abstinence as a goal for their treatment. And we work within a 12-step recovery model, and we work with the full circle of clients' loved ones, their significant others, their biological family or psychological family as determined by the client. We have parenting programs, children's programs, and we're also looking currently at a youth program because we don't serve the, I think, 13-year-old to 16-year-old or 17-year-old. We don't serve that population yet, and we're looking at that population now. And we're population specific, currently serving by gender, men and women, and our women's program is specific to women's needs. So sort of the foundational work around population-specific treatment began prior to 1980 when Renaissance and a sister organization, Dawnwood Institute, had two men's houses, two at Renaissance and one at the Dawnwood, and women started to ask and receive treatment, but there were gaps in the programming and there were safety issues. So in 1980, Renaissance founded a women's program, and in 1992, Dawnwood founded a women's program, and subsequently, Dawnwood founded a les-bi-gay program in the 90s, in 1995, and the reason for that program was because the reception to other treatment programs was poor, not safe, and yet there was a high incidence of drug use and low services. And it was renamed the Rainbow Service in 2003. And so it came to be created, the gender-specific or the population-specific program came to be created because there was enough of a need within the population to have specific programming, and also there was a population in the program that was able to deliver the program, because our mandate is that people who deliver the program have had lived experience and are also clinicians. So that's sort of taking care of that first slide, and then I'm going to hand it over to Cynthia to talk more about the rest of the
okay, well, thanks, Gail, I'll come back to you when we do our next round of questions. But thanks so much for describing the evolution of services. It sounds to me like you started out with kind of a gender-neutral service and then got into specifics because there was a need and a lack of safety. So those are interesting points we're going to come back to in our next round of questions. But in the meantime, can we just turn to you, Lucy and Julia, and can you just give us a brief overview of the Jean Tweed Center?
Sure. Thank you, Lorraine. Jean Tweed Center, some of you may be familiar with. It's been around for 35 years. Actually, we're celebrating 35 years this December. And it's been a service for the province of Ontario, providing women-specific care. And it started as a small residential setting and has grown significantly over that period of time. The intention really, as you'll see on the slide, is to offer a service that's really grounded and informed by the experiences of women, that we contextualize what we're offering in the reality of their lives, which is often trauma and violence. So with all of our programming, and you'll see on the second slide, we have a list of services that we provide. Many of these have evolved over the last number of years, and in particular the last 10 years, where we're no longer just residential. We've really taken our services to another level, where it's a combination of outreach, wraparound, and looking at other determinants of health for women in particular, such as housing, women with children, so services that are specific to pregnant and parenting women, and we offer child care on site as well, knowing full well that if we're talking about women, we are in fact talking about children too. So that's really an evolution. I guess the most recent piece we've included is primary care, and that's using telemedicine for that purpose. So an all-encompassing kind of approach to the reality of women's lives. Julia?
Sure. One thing that I might add is about our evolution, that I think as our understanding about the links between social determinants of health and the experience of women and its connection to substance use has increased, we start to look at the expansion of our programs with a gender lens as it relates to the social determinants of health. And you'll see that reflected in the continuum.
So that's interesting. So I gather that things are evolving all the time then, if you keep applying that lens to all of the social determinants and you keep adding services.
Exactly.
And
how many people are in residential care with you?
I'm sorry, how many?
Yeah.
So we have typically 18 to 25 in any one treatment cycle, and 18 of those women are housed in our residence, and the other women are coming through a day program. So it's integrated, and the women in the day program can participate in any other service that the residence provides.
So, thank you for that.
If I can just add a point, Lorraine, is that one of the other additional pieces that we've added over the years is the inclusion of clients who are using methadone, and that's still a relatively challenging issue in Ontario.
Great. Well, that gives us a really great overview. Thanks, Lucy and Julia. We're going to go to Dennis now. Dennis, if you could unmute your phone.
Oh, actually, yeah, that has to happen on your end. Hi. So you want to know about Breakaway Addiction Services. We are a program or an agency that was started about 27 years ago. We provide a number of services. We are based in the harm reduction philosophy, so all of our services are harm reduction in approach. We have a youth and family outpatient clinic. We have which provides family therapy and individual and group therapy for young people. We have a housing component, which is also harm reduction, and it provides supported housing for 40 individuals struggling with addictions. We have a methadone program or an opiate replacement program, which services about 115 so people, and is also on an outpatient basis. We have a street outreach program, which is a very pure harm reduction approach to working with street-involved individuals. And more specifically, what I'm here to talk about today, we have an opiate outreach team, which includes one member of the team whose specific function is to deal exclusively with women who are struggling with opiate addiction. And one of the reasons for that is that we became quite aware as we've been working with people who are opiate dependent. We've discovered that there are quite significantly different needs for women. Unfortunately, we're not able to provide that in the outpatient clinic, which is much more of a traditional clinic model. But in the outreach program, we felt that it was really important to have somebody who specifically is focused on the needs and of women, particularly street-involved women and women who have been involved in the sex trade, which often find themselves quite uncomfortable in a co-ed situation.
Right.
And as we work with them, one of the goals is to try to move them into more stable treatment programming, which in some cases we would be seeking out women-only programs as we can, as much as we can. The final program I wanted to talk about is the Pieces to Pathways program, which we are struggling to keep going, to be honest with you. It was established about 2 years ago. And the program managers in that program did extensive community research before launching the idea. And what they discovered was that for LGBTQ people, and particularly for trans people, getting adequate addictions treatment was difficult for the simple fact that in many cases when they went to traditional agencies, they found that the counseling staff and others became quite concerned about either their gender status or their sexual orientation, to the point where they began to see that as one of the precipitating factors. And what we were hearing from the community was, I don't want to talk about that necessarily. I want to talk about the problem that I have with consuming whatever drugs or alcohol. And it became fairly apparent as we worked with this group to develop it that an environment that was exclusive to that community was probably the most likely to provide a safe and therapeutic environment for people. And so that program is, without exception, operated by peers and on a co-developmental basis with the community. So we've had extensive consultation with people in both the LGBT community and even more specifically in the trans community to make sure that the programming and the format is comfortable for them. They do use the facilities of the agency, but generally the programming is run after the other programs are closed, so that there minimizes the possibility of negative interactions with other clients.
Well,
so there you go.
Great background. Just great background, Dennis. As you're really answering some of the next questions actually about how you actually came to develop specific programming for women, men, and transgender and gay and lesbian people. So you're talking about specific populations and the development there. We're going to dig into that now a little bit more deeply with all three agencies. But before we do that, Nancy, are there any questions coming in from the attendees on what we've talked about so far that might need answering now?
No, I think we're good for the moment. So carry on, and we'll keep encouraging people to type in their questions in the Q&A at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We'll pick them up as we go along.
Great, thanks, Nancy. So we're just going back to Jean Tweed Center now and talking a little bit about what these processes were, Lucy and Julia. How you mentioned earlier that you have continued to evolve your program and evolve the number of services that you're providing. Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of events or requests from clients or outside events or funding opportunities allowed you to do that?
Well, certainly taking advantage of funding opportunities, we look for every opportunity to do that, and some of it's through fundraising as well. For instance, our program for mothers and children, we ran for 3 years with funding from fundraised dollars before we were able to convince funding sources that it was a worthwhile program. And we did that through focus groups and an evaluation that was, quite a dramatic statement about the value. We also collaborate with numerous partners in healthcare and housing and social services and so on, and wherever we can, we work in a collaborative model so that we're bringing and braiding services together, if you will, and minimizing the likelihood of people kind of falling between silos of treatment. I think, one of the strongest influences for us has been the voices of women, and I think it's something Jean Tweed has always been committed to making a place for, a prominent place for. And, we learned very early on about the trauma and violence pieces, and that those needs were not being well met. And Jean Tweed actually did some research many years ago that identified that the vast majority of women that we were seeing had a trauma history, some of which was extensive and some of which was current but not historical and so on, but it was there, and it was there in about 90% of the women. And that was a self-report. So, I think it's fair to say that it's even higher than that. So we've been very active over the years in moving that agenda forward. A few years ago, we, with funding through the federal government, put together an advisory group from around the province, folks who are actively engaged in delivering services for women. And we established guidelines for the province for working in a using a trauma-informed lens. And those guidelines are, they're actually on our website, for anyone to view or use, and we've also been engaged in doing extensive training around the province. This is something that we've also had requests from services for men as well, so it speaks to the need for that population too, and I think that's part and parcel of probably next steps for those who are working with men. We've established, Julia and her team, we have a trauma team here at Jean Tweed, where we offer a range of services. Julia, do you want to speak to those specifically?
For sure. So the trauma-specific aspect of the agency does have a continuum of services. So one of the things we do is offer a fair number of groups. So we have some of the manualized groups like Seeking Safety, which looks concurrently at substance use and trauma for women, and is skills-based. We have a Building Resilience group that actually works well before someone does a Seeking Safety group, and that looks at some of the neurobiology connected to trauma and then its connection to substance use and other coping strategies. We have a group that looks at, called Parenting Beyond Trauma, and this is where you're going to see some of the linkages also around gender. So you're looking at the impact of trauma on women in their parenting. So what does it mean as a woman to be a parent and have had experienced a previous trauma, both in one's identity as a parent and also in one's parenting style? We have a group that's called the Trauma Recovery Group. It's a manualized group that was developed by Judith Herman and some others, which is a second stage trauma group. And we have a newer group that we've introduced that was actually developed by Women's College Hospital. It's called Trauma and the Body, and it's looking at the impact of trauma on one's somatic self. So there's a continuum of groups that we offer that women can kind of choose between depending on what stage of trauma recovery they're in. And then, of course, we have individual counseling as well. Having said that, though, the trauma-informed approach infiltrates the entire center. So with grounding strategies, for example, which is an aspect of first-stage trauma recovery, is something that has been integrated into all of our programs, as well as other aspects of trauma-informed practice and some aspects of first-stage trauma work.
And, sorry, go ahead.
You know, the other thing I was just going to say, in answer to your question, Lorraine, about how you evolve, I think one of the things we've been able to leverage, and in addition to fundraising and partnership, is hosting. So we'll kind of use whatever is available to us in the community in order to be able to expand the continuum of services using the gender lens. One example I can offer on that in terms of the hosting is Dennis was talking about the Breakaway program, where there is a woman counselor related to opiates who is doing outreach, and we were one of the sites that she would come to physically and meet with women. So where you can't offer it in-house, there's lots of things that you can leverage to be able to expand the integration of services from a gender lens. And that kind of collaboration, I would say, is part of working from a gender-specific approach.
And just to back up a little bit, I guess in a broader way, if we're looking at the environment overall, we certainly, at the initial stages of moving forward with trauma and violence, we certainly educated ourselves, but we also included our funding sources in that training and actually included them in all the activities we did. That had tremendous value, and you know, we've been told since then that was a real kind of turning point for our funders in recognizing the prevalence of trauma and the importance of addressing it. And in our guidelines, as you'll see in many documents related to trauma, including many of the documents on the UBC website, you'll see reference to the culture and the environment, and that's something we've paid a lot of attention to at Jean Tweed by creating and training not just our clinical staff, but all of our staff, ensuring that our admin staff and our cooks and our cleaners are all trauma-informed as well. So it becomes part of the very fabric of the organization. And in terms of clinical competency, Julia and her team are very much engaged in a reflexive process that well, I'll let you speak to it.
So part of a trauma-informed approach, of course, is to be able to acknowledge the impact that trauma has on the folks with whom we work, but also on us as staff. And so it's really important to develop a mindfulness practice from our perspective as a core competency that allows us to notice our own reactions to the work so that we can remain present. Lucy was alluding to the self-reflection, and a few years ago we were able to bring in a mindfulness practitioner to work with the staff for about a year in developing our mindfulness practice, and then we wove that practice into our ongoing clinical consultation as clinicians, as well as into many of our team meetings and our individual supervision, and into our peer support.
So whether it's in brief intervention or in long-term outpatient support, it's there, and we can use that mindfulness to inform the work that we're doing.
If we think about some of the main impacts of trauma, one of them being its breaking of connection, if we're going to develop a principle and a strategy based on that, we want to infuse both for our clients and for ourselves opportunities to retain or support connection, including with ourselves. And mindfulness offers us as a staff team an opportunity to do that, because trauma can spur one to want to break away from the internal experience and then sometimes at times from what's happening with our clients.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Lucy and Julia, for all that rich description about how you blend a women-specific approach with a trauma-informed approach, because that is one of the challenges of this whole project. And I know there are a lot of people online today who would be very interested in following up more on that. We'll come back to you, but right now we just want to have a look at Renaissance and go back over to Gail and Cynthia and Noah and just talk to you a little bit on the same theme. How did you evolve your various programs? What was the process? What were the indicators that you used to make change? What were the funding opportunities you sought? Can you just talk to us about that?
Sure. Hi, it's Cynthia. I'm a counselor at Renaissance, and I've been working here 5.5 years, basically with women and all our, I would just say all our counselors. We have 6 full-time counselors, 10 relief staff, all with lived experience. We're an abstinence-focused treatment facility, and our population-specific programming basically came from having a critical mass of clients and staff that could serve this client base. As I said, all our core program elements are delivered by the clinicians from that population. We have key program sessions explicit to that, such as our psychoeducational sessions will include such things as women-specific videos on women in recovery, self-esteem. We have a trauma-informed practice, and we were actually the beneficiary, a number of us, of that Jean Tweed-sponsored training facility on trauma-informed practice. We have sessions on self-perception and body image, and a large one on rage and anger in women, because a lot, as you were mentioning, a lot of the women coming here with histories of trauma can be very angry and haven't had the ability to express that anger or feel that they are allowed to express that anger in any way. So for them to be a little more normalized, knowing that that's pretty normal for people in this category. So we also developed a set of house rules for our women clients, and basically focusing on safety, as we recognize there may be safety differences between gender-specific facilities. And we would require women travel to and from our community meetings as a group, and they sit together as a group and return as a group, that we only allow visitors in the center during Visitors Day, and clients are not encouraged to meet friends and family at 12-step community meetings or get into other cars. Some of the male-specific programming that we have doesn't have these same restrictions. Safety isn't as much as an issue as it is for our women, our female clients. We also recently have been in touch with Sheena's Place, an eating disorder facility, and created a relationship with them where we can send clients who are struggling with their eating disorders that often rise once we put down drugs and alcohol. Other things come to the surface, and they can attend drop-in sessions at Sheena's Place during the week. We work with CAS workers, and human trafficking police authorities have come into the center to deal with issues that come up in our community. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, that's great, and you've touched on such a wide range of kind of additional or other issues that come up and that are specific. It really gives us a very rich understanding of how the critical mass of women, as you described them, kind of identify or emerge into a whole host of other needs and services, such as those around safety, those around eating disorders. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your men's program and what might be unique to it.
Well, this is Gail speaking, and I feel that I will do the men's program as a service by just saying a few things, but I know that they have a lot to do with anger management. They have a much freer sort of environment than the Women's House in terms of, you know, they can come and go on their own, and they can choose the meetings they wish to go to, and they can go out with their visitors. We don't have that at the Women's House. But in terms of programming, they have opiate specialists, counselors, and they have a relationship with our homes for transitional sober living. Unfortunately, we don't have that relationship in the Women's House with a specific place that we can work with for, similar to Jean Tweed has it, and I know our Men's House has it, but we don't have that. I really don't know the details of the programming specifics, so I apologize for that.
No problem.
But it is also 12-step based, and then the specific topics are probably more around, I know they have a lot more on anger. That's as much as I can tell you. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. We're going to just go and talk to Dennis again, if you would, Dennis. Do you have anything to add to any of the themes that have arisen in this section about the processes of developing women or men, or, well, just let's stick with women and men for now, specific treatment programs? Dennis?
No, I'm sorry. I was asleep at the switch. My apologies. I would add a couple of things from, you know, we work from a harm reduction perspective, so it makes work a little bit different than, and most of our work is done on all of our work is done on an outreach basis specific to women. So it really brings quite a different overlay into the work we're doing. So we're specifically looking towards providing services to women in a comfortable way in the environment that they are living and working in. And as I said earlier, a lot of the women we interact with, both in terms of the opiate outreach team and the harm reduction outreach team, which actually focuses with the majority of their work on women, the issues are around issues like how to deal with being a sex worker or trying not to be a sex worker. We do run, one of our more successful groups that we run is a group called Grief and Loss. And as you can imagine, a lot of these women find themselves in a situation where they have lost their children to child protection agencies. The group is not, and very determinedly not, focused on trying to recover the kids, but is to deal with the grief, loss, and trauma involved in losing your kids to the Child Protection Agency, and with the possibility that they will never return. That group, we've now run it, I think we're in our third iteration of the group. It has been probably one of the best attended groups that I've ever experienced in my career. We virtually never lose a participant, and most people seem to feel that it's extremely helpful. And as you can imagine, that's a terrible trauma in women's lives.
Yeah.
The other particular focus we have for this population is another group called Join In, Stay Out, which was focused on women who cycle in and out of jail, not to put too fine a point on it. And we identified, because we did do a lot of work in Vanier Center for Women, that there were a cadre of people who found themselves in and out on a regular basis. They would be incarcerated for a while, then they would be released, and, you know, relatively short period later, they would be back in. And so we began to work with women like that, and developed a group to help women develop strategies not to get put in jail. And, you know, that included things like, you know, more legal occupations, and you know, upgrading educational stuff and all that kind of thing that women often felt that they couldn't access on their own. And the mutual support from the group was remarkable, because they all recognized that this kind of a cycle was not sustainable. So those are two initiatives that we did, and we're focusing here on women. So I'll talk at another time in the webinar about LGBTQ and trans.
Yeah, well, it's a great segue, Dennis, because we're moving into that right now. And in fact, you can continue to talk to us, if you would, about the programs that you've developed in that zone.
Yeah, as you'll see on the slide, LGBTQ is my short form for something that goes on quite a bit longer. And we began to work with this population because we were approached by a couple of people from the trans community, interestingly enough, who were in recovery from substance problems and had very strong feelings that it was difficult to access treatment. So they came to us, and we began to develop this program with their help. One of the things that the mantra, I guess, that we've looked at in terms of program development is the idea of available, accessible, and acceptable, so-called 3 A's. And one is to make sure that actually these services do exist, that they're there. One of the things that we found in the research is that actually there isn't a whole lot. And often they are programs that are either integrated or semi-integrated into other programming in agencies, which for reasons that they were quite clear about, makes it more difficult for people to access them. So we need to have those services there. And also, we were aware that, and this is not an issue that we can do a whole lot about, but they're poorly distributed. Most of them are in Toronto and in the downtown area. Accessible really means that people can get to stuff, and that they find it, that the barriers to service are as low as we possibly can make them. So our program operates on a kind of modified drop-in approach. People are free to come and go. People can walk in. They can present themselves. They will, if they want, then they have access to more formal clinical counseling and other kinds of things. But the initial approach is very, very open. We've kept the bureaucracy and the people with clipboards to a minimum. questionnaires and so on are often intimidated for people from this population, and they have in many ways had negative experiences with this. And I can remember a couple of the people that we talked to through focus groups and other things saying, I got there, and then, they kept making me fill out all these forms, and then when I I complained that the forms didn't really apply to me in a particular way, they weren't very responsive to that. So things like what's your gender, and so on. And the issue of other clients came up over and over again. If you walk in, there are other people there who are not who are there for the same reason but are not necessarily accepting and accommodating. That can be a problem. We have to think about acceptability. That really means a lot of different things, and it can be as what some people would consider relatively minor, like pronouns. What kind of pronoun do you want to be used to use? While that sounds a bit over the top, it is fundamentally important. And we now start all of our meetings in this program, and for that matter, we're beginning to spread to all the other programs. A meeting of when we introduce people who haven't met before, what they're to ask. They can tell us what kind of pronoun they want to use, whether it's he or her or they or whatever. Washrooms become another issue. When we just recently did some renovations a few years ago, and the washrooms were all designated male, female. So we have changed that in the area which we run the Pieces to Pathways programming. So now there's a sign on the door that says, this is a washroom, this one has compartments, and this one has compartments and a urinal. And people sort that out as they want. But it sounds like minor stuff, but it is significant. And the other thing is that people also, when we we designed the program in two streams, interestingly enough. We have an abstinence stream and we have a harm reduction stream. Some people who are choosing to follow their recovery through an abstinence path then have a group that is all on the same page in terms of that, and that they can feel comfortable in. And for those people who are into another path, which is more of a harm reduction focus, they have a group that they can go to and feel like they're accommodated and that they're understood. There are a lot of other little things, making sure that the signage and postering and all that stuff is open and accepting to all of the variations of gender and sexual orientation is very important. And staff training, that we really have to work with staff over and over again as we go along, because this, we've discovered, is a moving target. It's not static. And what was okay a year ago, we have to always make sure that it's still okay this year. And part of that really is a dynamic interaction with the client group on an ongoing basis, so that we really are seeing this program as truly co-developed. So clinical experts will be able to sit down with peers and clients and figure out how to make the program work the best way it can.
That's great. That's a really rich description of your process and how you got here. And I think your last point is tremendously important, that gender is in no way static. And as the various identities and categories evolve, you're keeping up with that. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. We're going to go to talk about the very same thing now with the Jean Tweed Center. Lucy or Julia?
Hi again. It was really interesting listening to Dennis, because we certainly echo just about everything that you've mentioned, Dennis. We started a few years ago, and this is a multi-pronged approach, I guess. We started with the development of an inclusion policy, so that we began giving the message to our partners in the community, to our staff that we hired, to our funders, and so on, that this was part of our cultural worldview, if you will, that we were making a strong statement about inclusiveness, and that within that policy is a transgender population. We've undertaken training for all of our staff as well, and made sure that we have messaging throughout the agency around the inclusion of trans women. Trans woman is a woman, that whole series. I think it came from Health Canada. And interagency networking. Just recently, I've been able to engage with services in the city that are specific to women, and collectively looking at how we can work on shared challenges, if you will, around language and so on, so that we're moving the envelope forward at the same pace, so that when women enter into any treatment service, they hopefully can expect the same kind of references and so on, such as language, as Dennis mentioned. Infrastructure, we've created separate washrooms that are not gender specific, they're private, and we've moved away from doing the men's washroom, the women's washroom, that kind of thing. We're looking at all of our programming to do a review, and we may in fact engage some of Dennis's staff to help us with that. And I think the point that was made that is so important is that it is evolving, and that, you know, we know what we know, and we're open to learning, and there's a real commitment here to engaging with the community and getting whatever support we need to ensure that we're responding to these needs collectively. I really think there's room for a sector-wide response to working with the trans community, and I can feel the momentum kind of growing agency by agency, but certainly, you know, the work that Dennis has done and others is kind of leading the way.
I might just add an extra word about the environment that Lucy mentioned. So we're hoping as much as possible that when someone walks through our door, there are things that they see and experience that supports them to feel welcome. So everything from the reception that they receive from the receptionist or the admin person at the front door that's warm and engaging, to the posters that we have on the wall. So for example, some of our trans posters are at the front door when somebody walks in. We post our inclusion statement. We include examples in all of our programming that would relate to the trans communities when we're talking about the connections between substance use and life experiences. So it's about making the person, supporting someone to feel seen within the agency when they come through the front door and to feel welcomed.
And taking those messages out as well, so that we're going, it's not waiting for the trans community to come to us, that we're going out and delivering those messages in a very active way.
Yeah, that's a really key point too, and I'm glad you've mentioned that. We're going to move now over to Renaissance on the same topic, and I'm wondering, Gail and Cynthia and Noah, if you could comment on how you evolved your services for the trans population.
Yeah, this is Cynthia again, and I'd say last year about this time, and I think the Pieces to Pathways people came to speak with Renaissance and sent out an inquiry as to whether or not they could conduct an organizational audit as regards to our approach to the trans community. And we opened our doors basically to this audit. They reviewed our policies and procedures, our website, our promotional materials, our physical environments, all our program session outlines. They came in and audited our program sessions. They sat in. They did audits of our intake and assessment interviews, the first point of contact or the first call resolution people. And they conducted, they saw that we had staff training at 519 Church. I will say of the training, 40 of our total staff complement of 67 people, including all our head office staff, have attended the training, including at that time all our full-time counselors and management staff. And I think the approach to opening our doors to this kind of thing was indicated that we know we're only beginners at this process, that we're learning it, but we're anxious to learn, and we're open to learning how to change and how to be more inclusive. The results of that audit came back. The feedback was extremely supportive and positive of Renaissance. The staff evaluation they did demonstrated that we had a high level of sensitivity amongst all our staff, but we lacked some information, which speaks for itself. And we've had many changes. And again, we did the same as the other two organizations. We've changed washroom signs to washroom in our head office. We have posters up in the center. We have the Ontario Human Rights Code for gender and gender identity are posted on the bulletin board. We've revised our family program brochures to call it a program for loved ones, again, including the aspect of significant others, biological family, and psychological family based on the definition by the client. Our treatment record wording includes pronoun of choice. During our first call resolution, when someone first calls Renaissance requesting information, our staff will now ask how a person self-identifies and what is their pronoun of choice. We've had a number of language revisions in our policy and our website, and I would say that in our Graham Monroe Center and the Women's Center, we are definitely working toward addressing the issue of pronoun when it's appropriate with people to identify as they or them, to respect that. And it's, it's a challenge, but it's doable. It's like learning a whole new language.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that description. It's an amazingly detailed process that you've described. And it strikes me, too, that a lot of the work that's been done over the years on trauma-informed practice also includes audits. So there's some real similarities, I think, that we can build on in melding these two approaches for gender-informed and trauma-informed perspectives on substance use treatment. Nancy, before we close, I know we've got a couple of minutes. Are there any questions out there?
No, I think people have handled all the questions as we've gone along. People very interested in the mechanics of it. So definitely, I think that's been covered.
Well, that's great. I just want to ask all of our guests today if they have any final comments they might like to make before we close the webinar.
Hello. Hi, this is Noah from Renaissance.
Hi, Noah.
Hi. So my name is Noah Zavitz. I'm a relief counselor here. Gail introduced me briefly. I'm also an alumni from the primary care program. So I came through the house, the Graham Monroe House, Women's House 2.5 years ago. I started my student placement here and was hired as relief about 2 months ago. And I'm going to pick up briefly on what Cynthia mentioned as well with the Renaissance work with Pieces to Pathways. I believe there was actually a recommendation made that there needs to be queer and trans identified staff in each of the primary care programs, which is kind of where I come in. So I work with clients as relief, but some of what my role has been in the past 2 months is also to represent the trans community, which I'm a part of because my pronouns are they and them, and I identify as trans and non-binary, so that's kind of my role here. But I wanted to speak briefly to kind of what has worked in my opinion and what I've seen moving forward, particularly around my role here in being visible within the staff and client community. So I openly identify as trans, and in that way I've been able to kind of be a liaison for the work that the rest of the staff are trying to do. And I'm also visible for clients who are questioning their identity, which happens quite a bit in sobriety. And I've also worked with one client in the past 2 months who was questioning her gender, and I was able to be here for her. So I think that's worked really well. And what I've also seen from Graham Monroe is a huge level of willingness. And as Cynthia said, kind of we recognize that the basis of knowledge is not necessarily there, which is, you know, totally to be expected because this is new language and new content for a lot of people. But from staff, I've seen a huge level of willingness to kind of adapt to what needs to be done to have, as you're saying, gender transformative care. And I really see that happening. So what we're working with now, and you know, we're like very much in the baby steps with this kind of stuff, but very quick and easy ways we can start to implement these changes really revolve around language inclusivity, which Cynthia alluded to a little bit. So I just wanted to share my experience on that and kind of reiterate that, you know, there was a recommendation from Pieces to Pathways, which was followed up and which is where I kind of come in, and I'm seeing everything really come together, even though it is in the beginning stages, that Graham Monroe is making changes to make sure there's representation within the staff community so that we can better include the client community as well.
Well, that's been really helpful, Noah. Thanks for adding all of that and sort of personifying that additional recommendation. Do you or others from Renaissance have information on Pieces to Pathways and where they're at now?
So
actually, that's my program.
Yeah, and I'm going to refer you to Breakaway if there's any more questions about that.
Okay, great. Dennis.
Yeah, Pieces to Pathways continues to operate. Right now, we're on it. We're running this program exclusively on fundraised dollars. So, as you can imagine, that does not make for a secure operation. But we are starting up another cycle of drop-ins and counseling. And we will be reactivating the consultative work that the staff have been doing with other agencies, as you just heard from Renaissance. So we're doing a considerable amount of consulting around, you know, things like I was talking about earlier, how to make your program accessible, what do you need to do, you know, what does the staff training look like, and so on. And
are those services available in the rest of the country, or are they Toronto specific, or what's happening right now in that regard?
I'm not aware of a whole lot, to be honest. We're quite proud of the Pieces to Pathways work, and we did an extensive literature search when we did the original research for this, and we didn't find a whole lot. There are a number of programs across the country specifically for the LGBTQ community. But as I said earlier, they vary, not so much in quality, but just in terms of how specific they are. In some cases, like for example, at CAMH, they have the rainbow services, but they are to a certain extent integrated with the more mainstream programming in the organization. So I'm not really aware of you know, what's happening, other than to say, my educated guess is if we could use a whole bunch more.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're absolutely right about that. And on that note, I think I just want to sum up and say thank you to everyone who participated today in this kind of new format for a webinar with an interviewer. And I really appreciate all of your input, all your flexibility. It's been really insightful, I think, for all our many, many listeners across Canada to hear about what 3 leading agencies are doing in Toronto to deal with both women-specific and men-specific, and now the evolving fields of trans and LGBTQ service provision. So on that note, thank you so much to all of you for participating, and I think we all recognize this is truly an evolving field with lots and lots to learn, but I just want to say all 3 of you, your agencies are great examples for us to learn from. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.